Hey, what's up everyone? Mark Price here, devslopes.com, and now we're going to talk about designing a React application. Of course, this is a simple application. We'll be building a simple ingredient list in the upcoming video, but I want to show you kind of how it's all put together and get your brain thinking the way that it should be thinking in terms of React. Now, I have experience with web development, building lots of different systems and tools, and React is a breath of fresh air, that is for sure. Pull up in Photoshop here. As you can see, I'm wearing an Angular sweater. That's because I've been doing Angular development a very long time. And again, React is a breath of fresh air because you break things down into very modularized components, as small as possible. Whereas Angular components, they want to be components, but they're really not, because you got to put all kinds of other stuff in there. They're so convoluted, so complex. Which part's the model, which part's the view, which part's the controller. So that all kind of goes out the window. We get to focus really just on modular view components and injecting data into them. So that's really cool. And so we're going to talk about our ingredients app, really simple app. But basically, what we're going to do is we're going to have a component here. And we're probably going to call it List Manager. It's going to manage our list. And inside of that, we've got an input box, okay, and a button, like a submit button. And inside of that, we actually have a list, okay? And I'm breaking these out with lines to just show that they're components, okay? And inside the list, we have list items. All right? Very cool, right? So which ones are components? Well, let's grab this red arrow here. So your list item would be the smallest component down here. And then you've got your actual list, the list that makes up, this is the list that makes up all the list items. List item. You're like, this guy sucks at writing. Hey, chill out. And then we got our submit button and our input box. Now, I think I'm going to put both of these inside the main manager, okay? So we're going to call this the manager, okay? And so we're going to build an application that consists of 3 components, or at least our list item consists, or our list application consists of 3 components within itself. It's a component within components. And we could go even further, like make the button its own component. If you wanted a button to be reusable and does the same thing every single time, you could make that its own component and this its own component, and then you could inject all these components here. We're not going to do that with the input box and the button itself. I just don't think there's a need for it right now, but we are going to have these 3 components that make up one giant component. And so that's how you need to start thinking about your applications. I want you to take your idea and break it down to the smallest piece possible, whether it's a label, a list item, whatever it may be, and break that down into a component. Basically, the rule of thumb is if it's something that can be reusable, build it into a component. The more abstract and reusable you make your components, or excuse me, the more abstract and modularized you make your components, the more reusable they will be. Okay, which is really, really cool. With Angular, I'd have to build custom directives for this. They'd be very heavyweight. They'd include a lot of different things, and React just makes it real simple. So start thinking in terms of the smallest component or visual thing possible. And typically how it works is when you have a user interaction, okay, so let's say user interaction, if you can read that, interbation, is that a word? So user interaction would be this input right in the button. Whatever goes into the input, when you press the button, it's going to show up on the list. So typically with React, the user input, or wherever the action has, is typically the top level of the component. Typically, it doesn't always have to be that way, but the top level of your component is usually where the user interacts, because that's where the data comes from. User interaction usually means it's some type of data manipulation in most cases. And then that data will trickle down into those subcomponents down to its lowest level. So lost you there for a second. My starter disk was full. Thanks to you guys and all these terabytes of video. Hashtag first world problems. Anyway, so components, right? So you're getting the idea of how components work. So for instance, if I was going to sketch out an entire application, let's just do that now. Let's get, let's just make a new layer here, okay? And let's put some paint on here. Okay, merge these layers down. Quickest thing I could think of doing. All right, so let's say you want to start designing an application. This is what I would do, okay? I would draw it out. You can get your napkin or your cool Wacom tablet like I have and draw ugly pictures like I do. Okay, there we go. So there's our website, right? Just a quick sketch. Okay, so for instance, let's say we're building an application for to-do lists, okay? And you could create multiple to-do lists. So, you've got your big banner up here that says to-do. And what you could start thinking of is, okay, well, I want my to-do list to have the user to have the ability to make multiple to-do lists. Maybe this one's for food. This one's for Christmas, This one is for something, sports, whatever. And so you start thinking in modules and components, okay? Stop thinking about where do I style this and CSS go and all that kind of stuff. Start first thinking in components. What are the components that are going to make up my application, the things that users are going to interact with? And that's what you want to start thinking of in those terms of those components, okay? And maybe you have a comment section here. Maybe your website's open to comments and people can just chat about whatever, to-do lists, okay? You're like, what is he talking about? Actually, there's an app that went onto the iOS App Store recently by BJ Novak, the guy from The Office. And the whole point of the app is actually about lists. You make lists and people upvote it and downvote it and make comments on it. The things people come up with. Anyway, so you've got a list here, so you start thinking in components. So here's my comments, okay? I can have comments. Maybe it shows the username, so you could even start breaking that down. But what I would do is get the first visual snapshot of your entire website, what components you're going to need. And so in this website here, we know we're going to need a list component. So we know we're going to need a list. We know we're going to need a big comment box. So now we've started thinking of in the major components. Then what you can do, break it down even further. Okay, so here's a comment box. It's going to have comments. So this needs to have a comment component. Okay, great. Well, a comment component has a user image and it has a name on it. Okay, so that's cool. We got a comment component. So we can make a whole bunch of those, which will go into this. And then we've got our list item component. And maybe, you know what? When a user comes on our website, maybe we want a pop-up bar over here that can collect an email address, say, hey, subscribe now. And so then we could take that and build that into its own component. So that is how I would start building applications now. If you've ever done it differently, start thinking this way. This is the React way. Start thinking about components. Break out your application into things that users are going to interact with. And once you've broken out your main application, break them down into subcomponents like so, down as much as you can. Just, again, think of this. If you want something to be reusable, break it down as much as possible because it will become more reusable. Abstract as much specific things out of it as you can, and it will become more reusable. So for instance, rather than like having a list, for instance, called Christmas list, rather than creating christmaslist.jsx and like putting a bunch of Christmas names and themes and stuff in it, why not make it a little more generic, okay? Start thinking in reusable terms, and then you can use it for whatever you want. It could be Christmas, it could be foods, it could be ingredients, it could be whatever. So abstract specifics out of it and make it as reusable as possible. And that's React. And this is really, really cool. So enough of the ugly drawings, okay? We're going to go ahead and get into the code and build our very first ingredients application using our skeleton framework. And remember, to get your free live help, go to devslopes.com and click on chat room. I'm there all the time, as well as a huge community of other students.